Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Nate Key, aka The Flow. I have started to put together what I call Critical Conversations. It is a podcast and video designed to talk about race, politics, and hip hop. In light of the things that are going on in our world right now, I felt like these were critical conversations that I was having amongst my friends and fellow entrepreneurs. And we needed to start to broaden that circle and bring people into the conversation so that we could continue to grow and educate in what is a specifically interesting moment in our history right now. So these are critical conversations. I hope that you tune in. I hope you love it, and I hope you become a part of the conversation. This is Volume 1, Episode 1. Check it out.
Thought I'd take this meeting outside and enjoy some of this lovely day while we're here.
Tevon Campbell. Tevon Campbell is one of my best friends in the world. He's an awesome individual. Tevon,
Nice.
Sharlene is on. She is also a great friend of mine. She lives in North Carolina. She's originally from Brooklyn. She runs several businesses in North Carolina. She's a poet, a speaker. So I just wanted to get everybody on the call, and I'll introduce Marcus when he comes on. But yeah, I'm super excited. Tevon is the best heart inside of a black person that I've ever seen. That's the best compliment I give Tevon.
I'm about to say that's a high compliment.
Hey, you gotta watch out. You see how much my head is filling up the screen already. You get anything big, it's gonna be a problem. So, Charlene, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Tevon.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. I feel like it's an outlet that's needed. Because there are a lot of things that people probably want to say and don't feel like they have safe places to say it or to express themselves just as you need to be expressed without being judged or anything like that. So I see this as an opportunity for people to just get things off their chest and get to the real heart of things,
Yeah.
We may not solve the world's problems today, but we can at least have a good conversation and get ourselves in the right headspace so that we can attack or approach, whatever's going to be before us.
Yeah, right. Charlene, where you're in Wake Forest, right now?
Yeah. Yep. I'm in Wake Forest.
Okay.
Say what now?
How are things in North Carolina?
Yeah, it's interesting. In Wake Forest, I think, we're a small town, so we're maintaining, but one city over, Raleigh. It's been a rough couple of days, last couple of days. I was really encouraged. I went downtown Raleigh today for prayer and worship, which I hadn't done in a while with quarantine, not being able to fellowship with people. But that was a bright spot to see people engaging in community together. So much needed.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I've been having these conversations with you all in Tevon's case for years because we've been friends, and in Marcus and Charlene's case over the past couple of years, but more specifically in the moment that we're in, which seems to be a really critical moment right now, like for the U.S. but also for the world. We're dealing with race and the results of racism and white supremacy and in a lot of cases, maybe like I would just frame it as like kind of a bastardization of parts of Christianity. I think that have come to the fore as a result of the murders, right, and the killing of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. And so since we've been having these conversations anyway, and since there are protests that are going on, and I'm seeing people out in the streets, and I want to be out there with them. But I feel like my first responsibility is really to my family, my core unit where I live right now. I know I want to do something, right? I want to make an impact. And the first thing that I thought about was I contacted Tevon. I talked with him and I said, well, how can we make a difference? And then he said something about doing a call. And so I said, well, wouldn't it just be a great idea to get us on a call and to talk through what's going on right now and see what kind of conversation happens that might be able to push things forward if we use this in the social media space or elsewhere, wherever you all want to use this, you'll have a copy of the recording. So that's what this is, just to help frame the conversation. It's going to be, for the most part, open. I'll just help to kind of navigate it certain ways and, and ask you all more specific questions. But I really want to hear from what things are like where you are right now in your locale, and then like what perspective you have on it and where that's coming from. So that's all I'll do to kind of frame the conversation and opening. You know, we can start with Tev, with you and Sharlene. I'll do a brief intro again. Just, you know, Tevon is an amazing friend of mine. Worked with an insurance company. Just an awesome dad and friend. And I would say one of the people that, to me, has a really good grasp of living in between, having biracial children and living in between these communities that in one sense are very African and African American and Black diasporic. And then also, you know, having a wife who is Caucasian. And growing up being biracial, that's been really important to me. And we can hopefully have some balance with that. Marcus is biracial as well. And then Sharlene, who is, amongst many other things, a budding author, a speaker, a writer, entrepreneur. And I feel like just one of the best people to talk about these intersections of race and spirituality, although I should probably put spirituality first. I'm talking a lot, but hopefully it's just to be a little bit more flowery for introductions to you all, so that we can use these things well. So you can take some time. Sharlene, let's bounce to you first and just kind of intro yourself. Talk a little bit about what brought you on this call, why it was important for you to be here if you can. And then Ted, we can pick up with you.
Absolutely. I get to go first. Nice. Well, my name is Sharlene Provilus, and Nate, I appreciate first the introduction, but also the invitation to be a part of the conversation. So I am, you know, involved in a lot of different things, you know, wear a couple different hats and get the privilege of working with all kinds of people. And so I'm excited about the work I do. I run a company called Write, Speak, Inspire, which is a speaker management firm. And so I get to work with storytellers, folks who have some amazing stories to share, and I get to be a part of that conversation and supporting what they do. I was excited to be a part of this conversation. One, you know, any invitation that comes from Nate, I'm more likely to be like, let's do it. I don't think, you know, that was a quick answer for me, but it's just important. You know, I think you made the point earlier. We're already having the conversation. I think galvanizing people and putting people in a space to be able to communicate, you know, not just the facts, but also just the reality for themselves, you know, emotionally where you are, is healthy. I can't think of a more healthy opportunity just to say, okay, to kind of unpack what's happening. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to listen. I'm here to share and communicate whatever, you know, experiences I've had. But yeah, I'm definitely taking a listening posture for sure, and wanting to hear other people's stories and perspectives. So.
Great.
I think that's good. How about Tev?
Yeah, you know, I'm Tevon Campbell, not the singer. Just had to get that out the way. And I appreciate all the kind words you had to say about me. You've also been a great friend throughout the years. And, you know, I actually work in the diversity and inclusion space in my job. And it's, you know, I always draw parallels because you do that in a somewhat professional capacity. You understand that there's always going to be learning, there's always going to be growth. There's never a point where I think I will ever be able to call myself an expert in diversity and inclusion. But, you know, you put action plans in place, you're in charge of like accountability for organizations, and, you know, you try to get corporations in the workplace at least get those things on track. And then you wake up and see that the world is not catching up. There's a big void between where you think the world is heading and where we actually are. And, you know, amidst the atrocities that have recently happened, I feel like it's really just reached a boiling point. I remember, and even having a conversation today, I remember going back and watching the Rodney King riots and thinking, you know, wow, that was like an absolute mental time. There's no way something like that could ever happen again. We've progressed as a people. We've progressed as a society. There are too many checks and balances in place for just blatant, you know, disregard for others based off of what they look like or just differences to be a catalyst and just be so blatant as what was shown. You know, when Mr. Floyd lost his life, and it's like, I think that was the shock to the system for people saying, yes, this can still happen. Yes, this still does happen. And now it's like polarized me to want to talk about it and want to do something about it. So we're changing this conversation to clear my mind as a black man to try to get some of this weight off of me, because I feel a substantial weight and burden just for existing. Like, it's a problem to exist, you know, and to hopefully come away from here learning more about others, but also putting some positivity into the world, and like Sharlene said, mobilizing ideas and thoughts. Because, you know, those that's what's going to get us to where we need to be. We need action, but we need plans, ideas, and thoughts. So.
Yeah, I think that's an important point that I help to transition on. And I'll see if Marcus, did you get the audio working yet?
We dialed in by phone.
Hey,
there you go.
And Marcus is in Africana Studies at Buffalo State University. And, you know, we've had professional conversations, and then we've had, you know, as they say, like the side talk, where we just be like, bruh, like, can't believe like that just happened. So, I mean, he's really a person for me that helps me think on a different level. And so because of that, I'm really interested to have him as a part of the conversation. I think he might be dialing back in right now, but I wanted to bounce this question before we come back to him. So all of us have these relationships with white folks, basically. Like, you know, Sharlene, you mentioned that in the church, you know, specifically in your living arrangements, Tevon, your wife, you know, myself, my mom, we find ourselves, and Marcus, and I'm sure that you all have relationships with many different ethnicities of people, right? What would you believe from the conversations that you've been having is on some of those friends or family members' minds about what's going on? And how could our conversation here tonight potentially move the needle forward with an understanding for how this perspective on what has happened, you know, specifically with over these two murders, but really before that in racism and white supremacy, is the response that we're seeing right now? How can we help people to understand better why the response is so visceral? Or do we even need to help them understand better? At the end of the day, should that even be a part of the equation in your eyes? And then Marcus, we'll come over and bounce to you all.
Yeah. For me, when my mother married my father in the late 1960s, I think it's accurate to say she was the only white person at the wedding.
Wow.
Meaning, not a mother, not a father, not a sister, brother, auntie, uncle, nobody came to support her.
Wow.
Right. So, you know, she you know, struck out away from that family, and she'd be the first to admit that, you know, she struggles with certain things, even as, you know, a progressive white person. But, you know, she was in with my father on naming me Marcus Dubois, right, after Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois, and my brother's name is Malcolm. So she's no slouch when it comes to Black liberation thinking. But within that same white family, like, so basically one answer to the question is it depends on which person you're talking to.
You ask, right.
You know, right. I mean, so some people are ready for the conversation, and others are not, and probably will never get it. And then the last thing I'll say, I'll try to be brief. In response to the other part of that question, the deepest part of me, I don't think we owe white people or any misunderstanding kind of person an explanation for the reaction of Black people, the intensity of it, the tactics of it, or anything. Because to me, that's just another distraction from the real point, which is these murders, these extrajudicial, you know, racialized murders by police against Black people. The conversation needs to be there, and any kind of diversion from that is just a diversion to me.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. Can anybody else talk to? Yeah, Tevon, did you want to go ahead?
I was going to say that's a very strong point that you made there, because I see just in social media or even talking to some people put up infographics showing like, oh, more white people are actually killed by cops holistically, and it's like you're ignoring circumstance and you're not getting to the heart and the root of the problem. for people, I think when situations like this arise, it helps you identify who people really are, because you'll see them gravitate to their natural states, natural stances, natural responses. I think people are not owed an explanation, I agree, at all, for the reactions. But you are, when something on this magnitude happens and it's affecting so many people, this is where you're going to catch the most ears, right? So this is where we need to have a very strong focal point and message to get through to the people who generally would not listen, or you have people who are on the fence and like undecided. I think people make up their minds based off the stereotypes about people every single day, and that's because they have work to do with their bias. But it's almost like, how do you get people to identify that they have a bias and that it's actively working against them being able to get to the individual level of another person? You mar them and you have them housed in group, living in this group identity, and that's the context that you're easily able to place on multiple or anyone that you see that fits any of the parameters of that group identity. But what's the work that you're going to do to get the benefits or reap the fruit of the labor from getting to know someone on an individual level? My wife has had conversations with people that she's known for years and considered friends that she has had to unfriend and really, through these situations and through the banter that they've had back and forth, whether it's about Black Lives Matter or just explaining the situation. My wife has skin in the game. She has children that are, biracial. She has a husband who's black, so it's easier for her to see the focal point and see the actual impact, because that's what she's living with every day. But the thing I think that helps calm me and it has me actually approach and have the conversations, no matter how uncomfortable they are, is that people in general, I want to say they want to do good, right? But people are always going to have skepticism based off of the lens that they live their life to. So while these things can be realities for us, there's always going to be a level of skepticism for someone who hasn't actually walked in our shoes, and approaching, having conversations with individuals who may be a little more closed-minded and have to do some more work. So from that point of view, puts me in the stance of like, this is an educational opportunity. I think the other thing is like the change of speed with this, right? So we literally will need to have a million conversations about topics such as diversity, inclusion, and justice, things like this, just to move the barometer one iota of where we want it to go. And it's about it's about persevering, not giving up, and continuing to engage with the same level of intensity and energy that you need to continue to push it forward.
Yeah, I think that's good. I wanted to stick on a point that you made about social media, and then go back to you, Sharlene. But can you I saw the post, one of the posts that your wife posted. Your wife is white, and I was like, yeah, like it's some people like in this season that's like not just Black folks that are stepping up, being like, no, I have Black family members, Black friends, I have intimate relationships with people from the Black diaspora, and like this is not okay. And I saw that post and I was like, yeah, I get it. Like I'm proud of her doing that. And I feel like for me, just before I toss you, Charlene, for me, like that's where I can do the most work. I can do the most work in the relationships with the people that I actually know that I can impact. And then maybe, followers, other people that are social media, people that are looking at me for something that they feel like they're going to get. But when you mentioned that, I was thinking of your wife's post. And can you just talk about that real quick? Can you say what that meant for you, or did you even know about it? Did other people know it was coming? Did she lose friends because of that, or what happened as a result of that?
Well, I mean, it was just her speaking from her heart. It's not something that I asked her to do or something that she even approached me with before. She sees the injustice and she's just a kind-hearted person. But like I said, it affects her on a deeper level because she has personal relationships with our friend groups, with me, my family, and other various, people of color throughout her life. And that was just her speaking from the heart. And she had some very charged responses to the support of highlighting that like these injustices and atrocities need to be stopped and need to be highlighted, and we need to support movements such as like Black Lives Matter. More so the message, right? And there were just people who had extreme visceral reactions that happened to be, white, and were literally trying to like argue her down, saying that she was like disregarding other people. And it's not about that. It's about her expressing her concern for injustices that could hit very close to home for her. Like I said, we have biracial children that we have in the household and we're raising. Like, what is the world going to look like for them? What side of the coin do they fall on? How do they process these type of things when they're not really conceptualizing the threat that they're being perceived as? Because they look at it as like, I got the best of both worlds. They're just a combination of multiple cultures. But I know how the world is, what lens the world is going to view them through. So it's like, how do you compare them to that? How do you have this conversation? But yeah, it really was. Yeah, she lost friends. She had some back and forth exchanges, but I mean that's just the reality that we live in. And I'm glad that she is resolute in herself enough to know that, like, hey, these are toxic relationships and I don't need this moving forward.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, appreciate you sharing that. Charlene, can you share your perspective real quick as we talked about family and intimate relationships, and maybe for you, however you want to address that, but just the relationships more specifically with white folks that you have that are responding to or hearing from media, wherever they're getting this news from, or from you, having conversations with you. Can you just talk a little bit about that from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic for me, right? I live in a community with two other white females. We're not related at all, right? We've known each other maybe a couple of years, and our relationship started because, we have a commonality. We all are a part of the larger, I guess, church. We go to different individual churches. But that's where our relationship started, right? That's kind of what we all have in common, amongst other things. And it's been interesting. It's been, for me, it's been challenging, right? I on another note, some of the other personal conflicts, obviously you live in community with people, you always have the opportunity to develop, as you develop relationships, develop conflict. I don't think I realized how much, my identity as an African-American female and my relationships cross-culturally with the folks in my community, immediate community, were affecting me, right? So it's like, okay, I have some things that are just like, this is bothering me. And then I realize, I think this is bothering me because my identity is so wrapped into this. We have a general policy, in our house is like, hey, we want to create a space where people feel like they have the opportunity to be themselves. Well, in the last couple of days, I've had to have real honest conversations with people in my household to say, you know what, y'all, I'm myself up into my skin color. And then I feel like I have to become something else in order to be able to fit into this situation. And it's not because they've created that, but it's just the world that we live in. I mean, I think that that's a burden that I carry everywhere I go. Because if I were to take inventory of a majority of my relationships, and some significant relationships in my life, there are a lot of folks who don't look like me. And I'm really thankful for that, because there was a season in my life where that was really hard. I would not have been as intentional as I am now in developing those relationships, because I had a lot of trauma associated with race, and I just was not interested in doing that at a different season in life. So it's been good. I've had a lot of sit down conversations with folks who, one, I've appreciated their willingness to ask me how I'm doing in this season, which came as a surprise, I'll be honest. Not that I didn't think my friends who are white cared about me, but it's been interesting to have those folks reach out and ask questions, which has opened the door for me to have conversation, right? To be very honest in that moment and say, you know what, I'm struggling right now. This is really hard. I don't have answers. And I'm still trying to process that. And, I have a biblical view. My faith plays a significant part in who I in my identity. But even that's been a challenge, reconciling what I believe in my faith and also what it means to, walk that out with the color of my skin and in a cultural context. So it's provided some unique opportunities for me that have not been easy, but I think have begun conversations that just needed to happen. I'm saddened that they had to happen under such tragic situations, but I'm like, they're happening. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to run with it while we can. So.
That's awesome. I thank you for sharing. I mean, with that in mind, like Marcus and I, we were having this conversation real briefly earlier where we were like, we talked through this difference between race, and Marcus helping me to reframe that as white supremacy, like, and why this kind of language was so important. Marcus, are you still there? Is it frozen?
Yeah, I hear everything.
Okay.
It looks like when we see ourselves, we're frozen though, in terms of the video.
Well, it's still a nice picture though, anyways. So we were having this conversation, and you're a person who really helps me to frame what's going on right now in our country. You know, I think from a lens that is balanced, in that you're educated. You know, it's educated and balanced, where some people are like, they think they're being balanced, but they're really not even educated enough about things like, you know, their own ethnicity and how the other people respond to that in the world to be very balanced. So can you help frame the conversation we were having about media earlier, and how media is taking these images and taking the videos of things, and they're putting, depending on the news media that you go to or the source, they're putting these different spins on things to make people feel scared, more upset, they're kind of playing on those emotions. And you kind of drew me back to, this is not a problem of racism, we're dealing with the exposure of white supremacy here. So can you kind of just unpack that a little bit more and help us to understand what that means, why that terminology is important?
Yeah, for sure. I'll approach this like it's a prompt. You know, I'll just say some things, and then folks can react if that sounds good. But I think the starting point has to be to acknowledge that America was founded on white supremacy. You know, that just has to be stated and understood, right? And I think most of us know that, right? That the so-called founding fathers or the framers, you know, are white, male, wealthy, land-owning white supremacists, right? In other words, they believed in the biological inherent superiority of the people we now call white over blacks and everyone else of color. And furthermore, it didn't just start and stop there, but that it has been institutionalized, right, in various ways over the years. And I would think that, you know, most of us here, you know some of those hallmark kinds of events, whether we're talking about the Fugitive Slave Act, the Dred Scott decision. We're talking about, you know, obviously Jim Crow and segregation and all of these ways that this idea that whites are superior has been institutionalized, right, in order to give that so-called superior group of people, you know, all of the advantages in the society, whether it's, you know, in terms of jobs, you know, medical assistance and what have you, you know, the politics and so forth.
Do people in this country, from your perspectives, Tevon and Sharlene, do they have an understanding of that history? Or are we as a country, if you're not black, do you gloss over that history? Do you keep the good stuff? They say keep the meat, throw away the bones. And are you kind of disregarding the rest of history that you don't feel like feeling guilty about, maybe necessarily? Do you feel like we know that history as a country for white and black people? There's an acknowledgement of that?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, you know, when you start, well, all these systems they play off of one another. But I'm thinking, yeah, when I was growing up, going through school, was there an emphasis like, by the way, y'all, as we're learning history in public education, are we hearing it that it's, you know, it started with white supremacy? Absolutely not. That's just not, like, we may have touched on some of those things, but I think there is, I'm hard pressed to believe now in 2020 that people are like, oh, I had no idea. But I'm not surprised that there are pockets of folks who are still in some level of disbelief. And honestly, I don't know if it's guilt, probably just to have to face the fact that, yeah, this is a real thing. So I don't know if it's a, you know, on one hand, yeah, is it something that we're learning from day one, A1? No. But I think if you've lived in America long enough, you'll figure that out. But I think part of it is knowing, and then the other part is kind of owning that history. It's a lot easier just to say, oh yeah, we've made some progress, or we've done this, or we've done that, and not really just own where we started, right? The ugly part of our past. And I have had personal conversations with people who are white, and even engaging history, facts, is still this level of, and I don't even know if it's disbelief or just this desire to try to make it better than what it is. It's not. It's dark. It's ugly. Like, I just think, and I think, and you know, not to get off topic, but I think for me personally, and I know a lot of other folks, people of color, you know, sometimes, I mean, that to me, that's a sense of frustration in and of itself. It's like, let's go ahead and just acknowledge what it is. Okay, it's ugly and dark, but not acknowledging it, first of all, you can't create solutions for stuff that you won't address correctly. And even if you do, it's likely going to be out of context, because you're not starting with the truth. And I do think that there are some folks that don't consider that to even be an important part of the conversation. Like, hey, we need to acknowledge what's really happening, and then we can move forward. So, you know, those are my thoughts.
Good.
Yeah, I think that it's I'm trying to think of the right words to say. I don't think they're in a rush to acknowledge that the wrongdoings and like you said, how it was based on white supremacy, even though that is definitely, you know, the case in the fact. I think people don't want to be defined by that. And when I say people, I mean white people don't want to be defined by that. So again, they bring in that level of skepticism, or it seems like they're ignoring it, or they don't want to interact with that. When I think back to my cultural roots and ancestors, I bring up sources of pride, strength, perseverance, you know, barriers that had to be overcome. Nobody wants to look back at history and have to associate with the people who were creating those barriers, the people who were making it so the living situations were harder for everyone else but them. The thing that I think people don't acknowledge is that, you know, the world is really, like, the standard is based off of, like, white norms, like white social standard norms is what the world dictates, kind of how they determine good and evil, right? So I don't think anybody honestly is in a rush to do work with, like, okay, the way things are going are fine for me. It's not affecting me when these people are being affected in this, you know, negative way. I don't really have to interact with it. Having the choice of whether they have to interact with it or not is a privilege. And that's the other, you know, I think concept that people don't understand. So when we talk about the concept of white privilege, and it's like a invisible set of circumstances, or like an invisible care package that we say that helps people get along even if they don't ask for it, I think they think when we bring up the concept of white privilege that we're discrediting the work or whatever they've done to get to where they have gotten in life. And that's not the case whatsoever. There shouldn't be any shame associated with it. There shouldn't be any guilt, and there shouldn't be any discrediting of the work of where that person or what they've done to get to where they have to go. But there has to be an acknowledgement that there is systems that are designed that made it harder for people that look like us to get to where we are, or even try to get to the same playing field as where you are. And I think the acknowledgement is key, because once you acknowledge, then you can start having a conversation. You can't have a conversation when, you know, I'm sitting here pointing at this in the corner and you're saying I don't see anything. There's nothing there. There's no way to engage with that in a healthy way. There's no way to have any type of substantial change, or even start to have someone fathom, you know, how these concepts and how these things are affecting you in your daily life. So,
speaking of that, and Marcus, did you hop back on yet? Just want to give you a moment to see if they got the audio worked out, or they call back in. So along the lines of that, you know, we're specifically in this moment, we're dealing with like protests and things that are happening. What it looks like is the result of a black man who was killed publicly and openly in broad daylight, on the heels of another black man who was killed publicly and openly, like on video camera. Like, you can't get any better evidence or worse evidence, you know, however you want to frame that, as video of a person being murdered in broad daylight, you know, the last breaths that they took, pretty much. But I think that so I'll try to form this into one question for you all. What I'm seeing is there's a vast understanding for Black folks and many white folks. Actually, the majority of people who I've seen at rallies and marches are actually white folks, like that, because they still make up the majority of this country, even though that, you know, a Black man was murdered. I see a vast amount of understanding from the police force, from people who are doing the protesting. And then I see a sect of the population, as we talked about, do we understand the history, who does not have a desire. They don't have any desire to want to get to understand, and thinks that it's just about one situation, or, you know, and when they really don't know, it's not just about one situation, but they don't want to have an understanding for how it could be any deeper with that, because they don't want to deal with their own personal heart issues. Like, and that's where, you know, for me as a believer, it becomes a sin issue. You know, it becomes like an issue in my life that I carry personally, where I have sin just like everybody else has sin. But if I choose not to deal with mine, I'm walking throughout that world. And we haven't necessarily termed racism as a sin. You know, we haven't coined it that way, as where, you know, the average white person who goes to church will be like, oh, I'm carrying the sin of racism. You know, I'm harboring the sin of racism towards my brother and towards my sister. That's not an openly professed thing. So when we look at it, you know, a lot of people that I've been around, the Black people, like, they get it. Like, we're on the front lines. Like, so one question I'll ask later is, how do we reconcile with what we want to do as Black people, how we move the needle forward? But also for my white brothers and sisters, like, if you don't have a desire to understand, is not a core issue inside of your own heart? You know, Sharlene, can you speak to that at all? Do you feel that way? Or maybe we can have different perspectives on that.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm hearing what you're saying, yeah, if somebody's not willing to address it, is it a heart issue? I would say absolutely, right? And who knows what the reason is? I mean, I think at the end of the day, if we search deep enough, all of us have something that we're probably apprehensive about embracing in the ugliness of our own heart. You know, it could be anything, right? And I do, you know, to your point, I do believe that it is important. I reposted something recently from another good friend of mine who was making that point exactly. Like, we need to call it what it is, right? From a believer standpoint, yes, is racism sin? Absolutely. There's no two ways about it. The core of it deals with, I mean, obviously we have our implicit and explicit biases that we carry, but really it's rooted in, from my perspective, just this very warped identity, you know, ourselves before God. We are prioritizing ourselves before God, and therefore in certain instances, you know, literally oppressing other people to maintain this ideology that we've created that doesn't really align with who God is or who he's called us to be. And, you know, yeah, so for folks who are struggling to like face the facts of their own heart, I'm not gonna throw stones at them, because I recognize that it's taken me some time to address my own heart things. But I think when some things, the sticking point for me is, okay, fine, you don't want to address it, you know, and I'm gonna talk specifically to the church, because I love the church, I love the local church, and I love believers, and I'm saddened by some of the response of the church. I'm excited because there's parts of the church that are really stepping up, and, you know, being an example of what I truly believe we're called to be in this season. But I'm saddened by the fact that there are some folks that I know who are really struggling. And, you know, be one thing if you didn't have relationships with anyone, right? Because then I could see you saying, okay, well, I don't have direct relationships. But there are some folks who have direct relationships with people of color and are still struggling to even develop any level of empathy around this conversation. And for that, you know, sometimes I'm like, it's really beyond me. But yeah, you're right. It's rooted in something that's much deeper. And, you know, personally, I feel like if people don't address it, then even the work that we're doing, I'm hopeful that it'll move the needle along. But I'm nervous about how sustainable any of this effort is without people making true heart changes. So that's just my perspective.
Tev, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree. The number one person we lie to is ourselves, right? So people will lie to themselves and they just don't want to deal with it because that's going to require a lot of work, a lot of self-contemplation, a lot of soul searching, and getting right with the Lord. And a lot of people are not doing that, Like, we cannot fix these problems if you're not even going to get right with the Lord, period. I literally just had this conversation with somebody. I was like, I want to progress, I want to move forward, but people don't have direction. People don't have guidance, and they're acting like there's nowhere they can go to get that. We know that's not the truth. So.
Well, can you guys hear us now?
Yes, we can. I was just about to ask you that.
Yeah. Can I? Okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you can finish what because we were unpacking what you were talking about on that last point. Anyhow.
I'm sorry I missed so much as we're struggling technologically over here, but hopefully this last one will do it. I'm not sure if you got to a point like this, but did we talk about how white supremacy is good for some people, for a lot of people, for the majority of people who call themselves U.S. citizens? Because the tail end of what I just heard is a lot of what I usually hear about, education and, can they get it? Or, the people who don't get it, can they be half educated about it? Can they turn the corner and really understand? And if we haven't gone there, I think it's important to acknowledge that white supremacy is good for the majority of people in America, and therefore have a vested interest, either consciously or subconsciously, in maintaining it, right? It's obviously good for the highest person in the highest office, the person who's in the highest office of our country, right? And he got elected president, right? So I think it's important to acknowledge that this is not just a simple, if they just understand a little bit more, if they just get some friends, right? Even the good ones, the so-called good ones, they still benefit, right, from white supremacy, because they don't have that black tax that we've been talking so much about. They don't necessarily have to think about how they're walking. Are they walking too aggressively for the people who they're around? Are they speaking too expressively? What are their hands doing when they're stopped by police and so forth, right? The wealthy white benefit from white supremacy holistically, economically, psychologically, and so forth. But even poor whites, even if they're not benefiting from the society economically, they still benefit psychologically, right? All they have to do is use the magic N word, and they can catapult themselves above Black doctors, lawyers, and whatever psychologically, right? So I don't know if we addressed that kind of issue.
We did, but we didn't do it like that. So
yes.
I was about to use the N word to address you, so I know that wasn't gonna be right. But I'm like, you're right. So,
oh man.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you educating all of us on that, myself included. And this is part of the reason why I was like, yes, I'm excited to be involved in this, because I think that our education, is so important to us, because we can't have everybody on a call, right? We can't have the whole world. We don't have the power to change the whole world all at one time, although we have the power of prayer. But we do have the ability to learn from each other and bounce the baton and toss the baton around to figure out what our lived experiences have said about how we can make progress with the circles that we are involved in. And so for me, it's important to stay educated about things like terminology, about things like the history of white supremacy, and this, like what Marcus is describing, is like the very real fact that people are benefiting from it, whether it's tangible or it's psychological, and thus I have a vested interest in sustaining this thing that is now benefiting me. So I just, you helped me to have a really deeper understanding of that, and I wanna I guess stay on that, but shift a little bit towards, do you all feel, who's on the call, and there's no obviously right or wrong answer to this, do we feel responsible for educating people about what Marcus just said? Is it our responsibility to educate, or are we just live our lives, continue to empower the Black folks that we're around, and engage in the community that we're in, what is our responsibility specifically at the moment that we're in right now? What do we see as our individual responsibility? Can we talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, well, one, I wanted to say, Marcus, I appreciate you addressing that so directly, because it's just true, right? I'm starting to lean into the camera because it's just true that these things that have been set up are definitely benefiting people. And, to your point, Nate, I would say this is also a part of what I would consider part of the black tax. This I don't know, like, I hate to say burden because I can see the benefit of it, but the burden of having to educate people, it's exhausting, right? For me, I would say having this conversation, I've probably been more tired in the last 7 days than I have in the last 7 weeks, because I felt like every time I had a conversation, I not only had to explain how I felt, but I had to explain why I felt that way. And then I had to offer up some education as a part of that. That's exhausting. And I feel like there's so many folks, particularly in the Black community, that we're always having to educate others. And it feels like that's also a part of the burden. Yeah, on the one hand, it's like, I don't want to feel that pressure because I'm having to do that, even in my immediate relationships, having to educate people around just what it means to be Black, because they don't have that experience. And you know what? I don't know what it means to be white. So if I'm going to seek to have some level of understanding, then I do need someone who is different from me to help me understand their experience. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult. So I'm just going to say that. So yes, it needs to happen. But it's exhausting to have to keep having that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I share the same sentiment. It's definitely exhausting. I would say the responsibility is to educate yourself. Make sure you have the knowledge that you need. And the other responsibility is to always call out and interact and engage with bias. When you see it happening, someone else is doing it, because those can turn into teaching moments. You may not always feel like wanting to do it, and it can be dreading and taxing. But if you put yourself in a position and continue your education and continue to put yourself where you need to be in the mindset and continuously call it out, there has to be a change that happens, because you're going to be that agent change. Continue, just keep interacting with it. I think in education of white people, we need to educate white people on what it means to be an ally. So those who say they want to pull up beside us and actually be an ally and support, educate them on what is needed from them in order for them to do it in a capacity that will be meaningful. I can't go around and educate every white person that I meet on what it means to be Black. It's just not feasible. It's not going to happen. And they're all not going to listen. But when you get that one person who is ready to listen, ready to engage, and ready to be a real ally, you have to know exactly what you need them to do, or exactly what direction to point them in, so that they can be a substantial and meaningful, ally to what we're looking at accomplish.
Yeah. Marcus, can you talk real quick to that point about do we carry that responsibility to educate? You're an educator, so I don't want to make the assumption. I feel like it's part of your responsibility, but what do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Do we have a responsibility? I do think so. I mean, I agree with what everyone's saying about it being very hard to do it, but I mean, I think for me, it's rooted in just what elders are supposed to do generally, and then if you get more concrete, what parents are supposed to do with their own children. I mean, I think, we're supposed to provide guidance in education in general. I would say especially, I come to that thing from an African-centered theoretical perspective. It's almost an indigenous people's kind of thought process. And so those kind, things like eldership and so forth are very important to the way I do things. So yeah, in this case, in this 500 years of a racialized, sexualized, and so forth kind of culture that we've developed, the burden is just that much greater to teach for me. But I do think, we can't just stay silent. We're supposed to say things. And I think it starts with things. I think it starts with Black people teaching Black people, sharing, you know. In some of my classes, I start off, I teach at Buffalo State College. The majority of my students so far in this last year have been people of African descent. And I'll start off just by asking things like, have you heard of T.R.M. Howard? Have you heard of Pauli Murray? And I'll list some other, Yaa Asantewaa and so forth. And, I expect that they're going to say no, but then I tell them that moment, and then I follow through the rest of the course to tell them how central these figures are to Black American history and to African history in general, and how we don't know their names, but if we say Woodrow Wilson, obviously George Washington, like we know other people's history, but not our own, right? And so, yeah, that kind of education that Black Americans' history is it's not 500 years old, right? No group of people who calls themselves a people has a history that short. It's impossible pretty much to have a 500-year history. And we don't. The history is African history, right? And so we have to go back to the genetic origins of all humanity being in Africans, right? And so when what I would like for people to know in broad strokes is when they're doing those kinds of things to us, to people of African descent, right? They're doing that to the descendants of the original people, right? And this is the white archaeologists and geneticists who say this stuff, right? So sometimes we have that dependency complex, even when it comes to knowledge. Like we have to justify our knowledge, by saying, even whites said it, right? And I don't think we should have to do that, but we still do that a lot, but it's like Louis Leakey, the Leakeys, are the ones who discovered these kinds of things. So yeah, education, I think, is key. And I just think we have a lot more to say than we think we do in terms of educating ourselves and everybody in the world.
Yeah. And I think that's a reason why we're on this call. I think we're looking to continue to educate ourselves, and anybody who watches this or views it, hopefully they're going to get educated. And the goal is to continue to educate ourselves, our community, people that look and talk and act like us, and also people who are a part of that community, with people who look and talk and act like us, then we can affect the change in the way that we can, for something that we can impact and we can influence. And as we start to wrap up a little bit more, because I don't want to keep you all too long, but I think conversation is super fruitful. Obviously, we should do it again. I wanted Marcus to go back to you just real quick again to frame.
Yeah, no, I'll just add one little part about that education. I know you're trying to wrap up here, Nate, and I want to get to the media thing, but I think it should be compulsory, at least in colleges and universities, if not sooner, that students majoring in criminal justice should be required to take a course in Africana studies or Black studies, African American studies. It should be an absolute requirement, because anyone who's going to become a police officer or at any level of law enforcement should be an expert in basically cultural competency and the history of all people. It was a comedian, I think, recently, Chris Rock or something, who said he compared it to pilots, and you can't say there are only a handful of bad pilots. I forget who said that.
That's for Chris Rock.
Chris Rock, right?
The bad apples joke.
Right, the bad apples thing, right? You can't have a few bad apples who are pilots. You have to be an expert in what you do, right? Or you're fired, right? The same thing. You can't have bad apple police officers. That's life and death for people, So they need that education. I think it should be a requirement for anyone who wants to become a police officer or a similar kind of profession to take a course in Afrocentric studies. In terms of media, I mean, it is, to me, I think it's fair to say, I mean, I'm open for other thoughts, but I think it's just straight white supremacy. It really is, because when I break it down, the root events that are kicking all this off, are these extrajudicial racist killings by police of Black men and women, and that is, to to me, a human rights violation. It's an injustice. It's 500 years in the making and continuing. It's wrong on every level, right? And so if you are anti-racist, if you're not white supremacist, if you're truly anti-racist, you should be outraged, and you should line up behind the outrage and push in that direction, right? If you're really trying to change the society, change the narrative, change minds, right? So anything the media says that does not do that, to me, it's working. Even if they're not self-conscious of it, it's working in favor of a white supremacist, country and agenda, right? So if the media is giving into the narrative about people being looters, for example, calling them thugs and so forth, and to me that's the opposite of lining up behind the anti-racist agenda, right? It's a conservative kind of move. It's stultifying the anti-racist movement, right? And therefore it's working for the status quo.
Wow. There's a lot we definitely going to have another call, because we just go spend the whole next call on what you just said. We're going to record that and play it at the beginning with the Umi Says Most Def song that I was playing when we first started out. Man, thank you for unpacking that as much as you did. I think what I want to do to preface a next conversation that we'll have, because this is not the end, right? This is really in many ways like just the beginning, hopefully giving people a different media source on what's going on, in the world, and a different perspective that is Afrocentric. It is from an African perspective. I just want everybody, if you can, to just kind of formulate a word of encouragement or something that you would tell somebody who would be watching this video and they're trying to figure out what they can do to impact the world. They feel like maybe I felt before we had these conversations, might feel kind of powerless. I don't know what I can do to change stuff. I'm not running out to go and be a part of the protest right now, because I feel like that might put my own family in danger in terms of COVID. But I know that there's so much fruit that's here, right? Since we've been having this conversation, what would you say to somebody who's been watching this video, and what kind of encouragement would you give them from here on?
Yeah, I would say it doesn't always have to be a change on a grand scale and highly publicized for it to be meaningful. Start with you and start with those around you. Have those conversations. Eyes are opening, ears are opening. They may not be everyone's, and they may not be the people who need to hear it the most, but you have more people who are putting those antennas up, in the words of Kendrick Lamar, and starting to hear the messages that they have before either been skeptical to hear or have had no reason to listen. So look for what you can do around you. Every single iota of energy that you put in towards moving us in the right direction is worth it. And what you have to say is important, so make sure you say it.
Sharlene?
Yeah, I totally agree. I was just thinking, I was reminded of this earlier today. The first thing is keep doing heart checks, right? Don't ever take the needle off of just checking your own heart. Where are you in this conversation, personally and emotionally, spiritually? I think that's important for everyone, Black, white, to be really checking their heart. Where are we right now? What is I need to be taking serious inventory of what can be my contribution. If I'm a writer, you should write. If I'm a speaker, I should speak. If I'm an educator, I should educate. If I'm a parent, I should parent. Whatever your responsibility, keep doing those heart checks. And the other thing too, and just to kind of piggyback off what Tevon said, it boils down to relationships, right? It's, relationships and reconciliation, one-to-one. We are all connected to someone who's being affected by what's happening. Black, white, it doesn't matter. It's about going and being proactive and seeking opportunities to develop new relationships in some regard and working for a reconciliation with existing relationships. I just think that that's really important. And again, Tevon said it, it's not about trying to make quantum leaps here. We need to count every win. Every small success counts in this conversation. Although it's so much larger than any of us individually, I do believe the collective effort of all of us is it's not even like a good idea, it's a necessity. So those would be the things that I would say. Check your heart, keep diving into relationships, having those hard conversations, and if there's opportunities for you to reconcile even one-to-one, that's important in this season. I mean, that I believe that's really important now.
Yeah, that's good. Marcus, is your wife still there? Can she?
Yes.
Yes. Can we? What would be a big takeaway for you? For if somebody you know is watching this video, what would you want them to take away from what we said so far?
Well, all I have to say is that a takeaway to be like unity, and in Ghana we say "ekomefemo." Ekomefemo meaning unity. When we come together, we are strong together, and when we unite, like I know there is a big thing of African Americans and Africans, Africans sometimes will tell their kids, don't act like Black Americans. The way they act, that's why they get shot and stuff like that, because they are disrespectful. So when Africans have their kids here, they steer them away from hanging with Black Americans. But the fact is, if your African kid gets stopped, they don't hear their accent first. They see the skin color first. And so at the end of the day, we have to unite and stand together, because we are all one. This is humanity. We got to stand together and fight together. So that's all I got to say.
Amen. Marcus, can you wrap us up?
Yeah, I would say for me, I like the idea of developing relationships, but I think the primary one, and it doesn't exclude any other kind, but I think the primary one, especially for people of African descent, is to start cultivating a relationship with Africa. African history, African culture, the African heritage that's come through our culture in so many different little ways. And then I'm reminded of the late Dr. John Henrik Clarke, who says, for an oppressor to be on your back, you have to be in a certain kind of position for that to happen, kind of a hunched over, bent position. He said, the fastest way to get them off your back is stand straight up. And I think a lot of that has to do with attitude, consciousness, understanding the incredibly rich, not even having to romanticize it, but just the incredibly rich history that, people of African descent have going back to the continent. There's a lot to be proud of. There's almost everything that's unknown to us. And I think the more we develop that relationship with our own past, the more we can have an appropriate and accurate understanding of ourselves. And I think we can start standing straight up and looking people in the eye as men and women, or however we identify. And then maybe something will start changing.
Yeah. Well, I just want to take a minute to just appreciate you all for being on this call and just taking your time. We've all talked about, what, if anything, we could control in this season where it feels like so many things are out of our control. But you know what? You took the time because it's important to you and it's important to me as your friend and family member, that we engage and that we engage with other people who might be watching this or listening to it. To develop on that unity that we all experience between each other, because we agree that our lives are important, we agree that our voices are important, and we agree that when we get together and we talk about these things, they matter. So I know that people are going to listen to this. I know they're going to watch it, and I'm glad that you all took the time to do this and agreed with me about how important it was. So thank you. It's not the last conversation. We'll all have individual conversations, but hopefully we can reconnect soon to unpack some of the other things and kind of go a little bit deeper about some stuff that we talked about today. So thank you. I love y'all, and we'll talk again soon.